Hello and welcome everybody back to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian. Now I'm doing this episode from my brand new standing desk, so I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty pumped about this one. My body's feeling pretty energized, so let's get right into it. Today we are going to be breaking down the top 16 from the most recent Mox Masters January 2024 edition. Mox Masters is back in the year 2024, run by the Chaos Tournaments groups and also the ever wonderful brand Playing with Power, one of the largest cEDH, if not the largest cEDH channel on YouTube right now. Before we jump into these though, I'm gonna remind you to hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoy content like this. It helps out the channel a ton. And if you're interested, check out patreon.com/comedianmtg to support the channel in very amazing ways. We have so many tiers that are up there right now, and I'm actually gonna be going into the Patreon over the next few weeks and trying to restructure a few things because I wanna make it so that it is the most helpful for all those who sign up for the Patreon. I'm gonna be doing some stuff with some of my unreleased deck lists, which, you know, I have 500 of them in Moxfield and many of them are still unpublished. So I think there could be a lot of really cool stuff in there that I can head out to some patrons and some other perks and stuff like that as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about patron perks as well as some cEDH coaching later in the episode. So let's break down this tournament, talk about the top 16 decks from this event, and go into some pretty cool stories that happened during this tournament. Deck list number one we have is Nas is Still for Value, Mox Masters 24 by Urshuman. Okay, yeah, I actually didn't know this one. Okay, sick. This is a Timnacrom Blue Farm list here. Now, those who are familiar with Blue Farm might not be too surprised by a lot of the inclusions here in this list, but for those unfamiliar with the archetype, Blue Farm is one of the definitive mid-range decks in the format. It is a Timnacrom partner pairing trying to basically control the game out to a certain point, be a really strong mid-range deck with some very high card quality, and then win the game with either a combination of Thassa's Oracle with Demonic Consultation or Tainted Pact. We are also trying to win the game with Underworld Breach combos, looping through our entire deck by resolving and ad nauseum pulling a large amount of cards, basically equal to the amount of life we pay, out of our deck and through a number of ways like that. Blue Farm is definitively one of the best decks in the format, especially since the printing of Orcish Bowmasters and the One Ring, and this card has been putting in a ton of work in the format. This deck is very, very powerful and will probably continue to be so for a long time. So congrats to Urs for the top 16 placement with this pretty solid Blue Farm list. As I mentioned, not too many crazy innovations here with the archetype, but well-piloted list brought to top 16 of this tournament. We have Foolish Opus Thief here by Romanian Chef. This is a Tevesh Crom list. Tevesh Crom basically being the, I would argue, bigger version of Blue Farm with the big Tevesh in the command zone, just losing a color for the sake of being able to go bigger with cards like Hullbreaker Horror and stuff like Displacer Kitten with Tevesh as well. Now this variant is a little Opus Thief themed. And for those who aren't familiar with Opus Thief, it's an archetype that was really popular for a time that basically tried to break parity on effects like Bowmasters or Narset or Notion Thief, although Bowmasters wasn't legal at the time that this deck was quite popular, and combine those with the wheels like Wheel of Fortune, Windfall, and Time Twister in this list. The idea is to wheel your opponents with something that prevents them from gaining as much advantage as you would and also puts the game in your favor. It basically creates a number of quasi one-card combos that exist in your deck, right? Your opponent's being stripped of all their cards and being left with a single card in hand when you get a fresh grip is pretty solid. Not to mention what happens when you give them 20/21 Bowmaster and 21 damage to spread around the table, or just take 28 cards for yourself because of Notion Thief. So that's probably the biggest spice in this list. The rest of this looks a lot like a Tevesh Crom mid-range deck. We got a lot of the classic mid-range pieces. We got Fierce and SWAT to power out your 5 mana commanders, giving you a little bit of backup when you finally get them out. We got an Ad Naus game plan. We got the One Ring. No Talion in this list, but it's clearly the sacrifice we have for the ability to play all these wheels. We have Hullbreaker, which is one of the more interesting Tevesh win cons. For those who don't know, you can basically bounce your rocks back and forth, generating infinite mana, and then start bouncing Tevesh back and forth, making thralls, and then drawing cards each and every time, so you can draw through your deck and then play a Thoracle. Really cool to see more Tevesh Croms doing well in this format. Obviously, it's a deck that I have a lot of success with in the past couple months, right? I've top 16 and won a tournament with this list, and it's one list that I think is obviously really strong. So really cool to see this innovation with the deck going to more of an Opus Thief style strategy. But yeah, sick. We play in Yu-Gi-Oh! January 24 by Samurai Dancer. Samurai Dancer Loving this old Malcolm Kedis deck. Samurai has been known to play this deck quite a lot, won the Mox Masters Invitational last year with this very deck. The idea is that it is a deck that gets Malcolm out, plays Kedis, and then starts making 3 treasures every combat damage. We actually did play in the top 16 in which they had this combo going, as well as having Reckless Fireweaver on the battlefield. So literally every time Malcolm hit us, we were taking 5 damage per combat. So that definitely started to add up real quick in that match. It was actually cool because I didn't realize that I hadn't played Samurai until this very tournament. So this was actually our first game together in that top 16 match. Spoiler, I'm in this top 16 as well. But yeah, the idea of this list is to either win with the Glinthorn Buccaneer combo, which in combination with Malcolm deals infinite damage to your opponents and cycles through a large portion of your deck, to get something like a Niv Mizzet Perrin on the battlefield and combine it with some Curiosity things like Curiosity and Ophidian Eye, or to use cards like Maskwood Nexus or Trickery Charm and Artificial Evolution to be able to change the creature type of some of your creatures to pirates. For example, we're talking about Reckless Fireweaver as one of the main examples, or Hedron Detonator. And then when you hit someone with Malcolm Create a Treasure, it creates an infinite loop of dealing infinite damage to your opponents. So a number of different ways to really pay off with this deck, and it's probably one of the most consistent Izzet decks in the format. Samurai has been doing very, very well with this list, and I know they will probably continue to do so. We have 5 Color Orcs by Splocketeer. This is a Najeela mid-range Nas list. For those of you who aren't familiar with our classic Najeela list, as it looks like in 2024 cEDH, it is a hybrid of basically this ad nauseum style strategy, winning the game with things like Breach and Thassa's Oracle and stuff like that, or being able to use the fact that Najeela is a 1-card combo with several very broken cards like Derevi and Grim Hireling. So you have efficient creature combos, you have efficient ad nauseum lines, you have Underworld Breach, you have basically, you know, just a little bit of everything of the best stuff in the format, and that's where Najeela gets its strength, right? You lose a bit of card advantage in the command zone, but what you gain is a combo piece, an inevitability engine, and the fact that Najeela herself can just win games by attacking turn after turn. So Najeela is consistently very strong in this format, and consistently will be continuing to put up results. So congrats to our pilot here, Splocketeer, for this top 16. We have Crom Timna 1 by Lotus Master. This is another blue farm list, or not? Wow, feel free to keep that in, Cal. That's a live reaction here. This list is crazy. I love it. So this is a blue farm list definitively, but definitely bringing the heat and the spice to this deck. Wow. A lot of pieces here that I'm definitely not used to seeing in blue farm, right? So we have our normal sort of stuff here. Top in the artifact package, which is kind of interesting. We still have our intuition lines with Breach and stuff like that. We have our Thassa's Oracle Demonic Consultation stuff, but this is a very, very creature heavy version of blue farm. I mean, you usually don't see Containment Priest in these decks. You don't see Gilded Drake a lot. You don't see Phyrexian Revoker as a stack, like a lot of these stacks pieces at all. Like Revoker, Aven Mind Sensor, Kitesail Larcenist, Facebreaker, Tidebinder, Treasure Nabber, like, yeah, Hireling too, right? These are so many different creatures that I am very much not used to seeing in blue farm. Also playing the full triple clone package of Duplicate, Fimage, and Metamorph, which in this current metagame is pretty solid. So what it seems like they're giving up in some stack interaction, right? Really only playing Offer and Swan Song, not playing Force of Negation, not playing some other normal interaction pieces here, but instead choosing to play a little bit more of these like creature stacks pieces. So yeah, this is pretty unique. I've never seen a blue farm list that looks like this, which is so funny given the fact that it has such a generic name to the deck. Yeah, Urza Saga in the mana base. Whoa, this deck is wild. Like, I genuinely have never seen a blue farm deck that looks like this. Congrats to our pilot here, Lotus Master, for taking a super unique take on blue farm into this top 16. I mean, yeah, like I haven't seen a bunch of these cards in quite some time, so that's super cool. We have Jay Mills here with Do the Thing and Win the Game. Such simple instructions, I love it. This is a Crom Tavesh list, much like the one we were looking at earlier, except for this one is definitely a little bit more aggressive, it feels like, than some of the other Crom Tavesh lists that are out there right now. This one, you know, having a few pieces like Dragon Rage Channeler for an early creature. Also pretty good to sack to Tevesh as well. We have Burgi, which from time to time can be played in these archetypes. Sometimes Burgi's really good at the Storm half. Sometimes it's really good as a backup engine when you use the Harnfell Horn of Bounty side. But apart from that, very similar to the list we were looking at before. I'm kind of surprised to see Windfall in this deck as opposed to just Wheel of Fortune. Feels like a strange distinction to make, especially because Wheel is so consistent compared to Windfall. And then Yawgmoth's Will, which isn't always played in this archetype as well. And some of the 1-mana interaction pieces here are pretty interesting too, like Dismember and actually Deadly are not often played in this archetype. Dismember mostly because Ad Nauseam's still in the strategy, and Deadly, I mean, for Ad Naus, usually it's not in there, and also because you have 2 5-mana commanders, I mean, a lot of them do play SWAT and Guardianship, but yeah, not this one as well. We also have Grinding Station Lines in this deck too, so this is definitely a really unique take on this Tevesh Rom list. It's definitely running some interesting slots not always seen in this archetype. Hey, it's me. This is my Zirda's Back Baby list. This is my adaptation of Dawnwaker Thrasios for the year 2024. I have been taking a break from this list for quite some time to basically figure out how Orcish Bowmasters was slanting this metagame. What was that card basically doing to hit a deck like this? And a deck like this that was really reliant on a lot of 1-mana mana dorks. Now, you do see I have 3 kind of premier ones here, being Birds, Noble, and Delighted, but mana dorks are basically out of this deck, and we're down to like 15 artifacts here, playing things like Talismans and Springleaf Drum, which was already in the deck, but we're definitely a little bit heavier on mana rocks in this deck than we ever have been, and we're playing things like Spirit Guide, so definitely a little bit faster. Not only that, but the top end of this deck definitely got a facelift. I mean, we are playing not just Seedborn Muse, which used to be the big top end card of this archetype, but I'm also on Consecrated Sphinx and Hullbreaker Horror, which Hullbreaker is so good at being this thing nobody expects. I will say it didn't come up a ton during the tournament, but that's just because you can only see so many of your cards during the tournament. Consecrated Sphinx came in clutch during one of my games in this match because basically Seedborn Muse came down the other way around. Actually, Consecrated Sphinx came down, drew me some cards, became the big center of attention, ate my removal, and then when I followed up with the Seedborn Muse, my opponents were like, well, yeah, we just used all of our creature removal on that Consecrated Sphinx. So it's kind of necessary, once again, in these decks, as we're moving into the modern era of cEDH, to be able to go over the top of things that your opponents are doing. Another big change is we're adding Grand Abolisher in the list, which wasn't in the list for a long time because we were so mid-range slanted, but with the way cEDH looks right now, you just kind of need to play a card like this. Same thing with Spellskite to be able to protect our creature-based combos, because our creatures are a lot of our combo pieces in this deck. The rest of the list is a lot of mid-range stuff. You will not see a card like Underworld Breach in this deck. The thing is with a combo like Breach in this list is you basically have Intuition as the only way you can like assemble that combo. And then the cards are pretty not great on their own except for Breach itself. So the idea here with this type of deck is that we are going really hard into that mid-range creature combo space, right? We're trying to do that specific thing the best that we can possibly do it. And now adding Tezzeret to the deck was absolutely awesome. Minskamboo didn't see it the entire tournament, so a little bit of shame on that part, but Tezzeret won me a few games during this tournament actually, and it was very, very powerful and a piece we didn't have before, but because we're always kind of looking for that thing to go grab the artifacts out of our deck that are our combo pieces. Zirda back in the list because it's definitively part of this archetype, it's part of the name, and when we add Grim Monolith back in the list, it made a lot more sense. We're now moving the deck to a place where having pieces like Grim Monolith make more sense because we have Consecrated Sphinx, Hullbreaker Horror, and other big payoffs like that, even things like Smothering Tithe. So when we have the deck moving more towards that pace, this card makes a lot more sense than it did when the deck was super full of things like Elvish Mystic and Llanowar Elves. Really happy that the deck was able to come out and perform. I was really even happy with it in the top 16 match where we lost, where Croc Sakashima was firing off on all cylinders, and we'll talk about that deck a little bit later in this breakdown, but super happy with how the deck felt in this tournament. It felt like, as opposed to the past 2 tournaments I brought it to, where it was like this deck did not feel like it was competing on the same level that it used to. When I brought it to this tournament, it felt like it was really firing on the cylinders I needed it to. It felt like it was closer to a deck like Kinnan than it previously had been, and that made me feel really good because I love this deck. There's a video on this channel with me calling that my favorite deck in cEDH, so to lose that from the metagame would be really tough, but it still felt really good, and I'm really, really happy with the changes I made to it. It definitely needed a lot of TLC to get it to this point, to bring it to this tournament, but finally felt very comfortable with it and very happy that I brought it for sure. We have Dwarf Storm by Pigeon Eyes. This is Magda. We've had a couple of Magdas pop up a little bit more recently than we have historically. But yeah, this is a big old Magda pile here, right? We got a lot of the artifacts and things you'll be tutoring out with Magda as you get through these. For those who don't know, Magda in general tries to play a couple of these cheap and quite poor dwarves, channel those into getting 5 treasures with Magda, and if you have an artifact dwarf, it can turn into an instant speed combo, and if you don't, well, you can still jam giant things like Portal to Phyrexia and make your opponents quite miserable as that process goes along. So kind of crazy to see Magda still doing well. I mean, it's a deck that will show up 1 or 2 of in these top 16s every once in a while. And, you know, the pilots who love this deck truly adore this deck, but it is genuinely quite impressive to see this deck still performing in a Bowmasters meta, because a lot of Magda pilots I know, myself included, as I did pick up that deck for a little bit, just really are struggling to play in the Bowmasters meta. So well done to Pigeonize here for the top 16. Yuriko Doomsday by Edmus 2003. This is Yuriko Tempo Doomsday list. We were talking about the ever classic Yuriko. Yuriko is known for being able to play a lot of these cheap enablers and cheap ninjas, be able to, on the second turn, trade them out for a Yuriko who never cares about that commander tax, and be able to flip card advantage off the top of the library. Now, one of the things that's been limiting to Yuriko is the ability to convert all of that card draw to an actual win. Sometimes you can burn people out by 15ing them with the Shadow of Mortality, but sometimes you just do it the old-fashioned way, the real old cEDH fashion way. You hit him with a Doomsday, you make your pile so small that you can win with a Thassa's Oracle, and then it's a nice, clean one-card combo with Doomsday and your commander. You'll notice some of these Yuriko lists have always had this ability to break parity on certain stacks pieces. So you'll see Curse Totem and Null Rod in this list, being able to hit some of the most important things in the format, as well as a Grafdigger's Cage. So Yuriko saying, you know, if it doesn't really affect me, I don't quite care. Still playing the One Ring despite being on Null Rod, which I really, really like from this deck. Just the ability to say, you know what, if the One Ring's good, it's gonna rip me a ton of cards, and if not, you know, we'll just Null Rod everybody and slow them the heck down, because I'm not about to die to a Dockside anytime soon. We have Insidious Dreams here, which I haven't seen in a really long time, but basically you discard a bunch of cards from your hands to top deck tutor, and you stack your deck with Yuriko and just, you know, 30 people when you hit them in combat damage. So kind of cool to see Yuriko back in the swing of it. It had like a really good run last year where it made, I want to say, like 5 or 6 tournaments where they top 16, and I think 1 or 2 top 4s, but yeah, definitely cool to see it back in action. We have, see, now I've taken this as a challenge. A deck by Doc Lime here. Nice job on top 16ing, Doc Lime. Doc Lime here with this Najeela list, much like the one we saw earlier in this top 16 breakdown. This is a classic mid-range / ad nauseum turbo Najeela list. We're talking about the Underworld Breach stuff. We've got ad nauseum in this deck. We've got the 1-card Najeela combos with Derevi and Grim Hireling, and a lot of the best stuff in all of 5 colors and Thoracle combos as well. Plus, about the fact that we got some kind of unique choices here. I definitely have not seen many imposter mechs in this archetype leading up to this point. So that's kind of a cool inclusion, as well as Metamorph as well, and Fimage. So, you know, as I was talking about earlier, people are playing this big clone package, and it keeps doing really well for people. I know adding Metamorph and Flesh Duplicate into my Dollmaker list, I mean, Flesh Duplicate won me at least 2 games in my tournament. So clones are good right now, everybody. Even if it's, you know, 2 mana to make a copy of someone else's Kinnan. Turns out those things are really, really good. So yeah, keep your clones in mind, because they continue to overperform in this format. We have Juggernaut Scott 2 here with Blue Farm. This is Blue Farm. Now, one interesting thing here is that they are on the Teferi Displacer Kitten lines, which several people have attributed kind of being the thing that I've pushed in this deck. I definitely know that it is one of the things I'm very high on in Blue Farm. I love Teferi in this deck. I think it's so cool to be a Grand Abolisher, as well as a temporary bounce spell in 1 card, and then the ability to convert a single tutor into a win with Displacer Kitten, as long as you have the mana rocks that tap for the appropriate amount of mana, basically making more mana than they cost. So things like Crypt and Chromox, or so actually Chromox and Jewel Lotus and Lion's Diadem also work with this combo, because it doesn't matter that they need to produce mana as long as they can be cast for 0. But the idea is that you can bounce through your entire library and draw the whole thing out, and then play a Thoracle for the win. we have Dress Down and Touch the Spirit Realm, which is a combo I haven't really quite seen in some time. I know Dress Down and Touch have been played in this archetype a decent amount, but usually not in the same versions of the deck. Snapback, also very much a early 2020 version of auto includes for Blue Farm, and I know a lot of players have been high on it historically. Angel's Grace, showing up more and more now in some of these Blue Farm lists. I think this card is one that was slept on for quite some time, but given the current shape of cEDH, given the fact that things like the One Ring exist and can buy turns at the wrong time, given the fact that you play cards like Final Fortune, sometimes these outs are necessary. So kind of interesting to see that, and not see a card like Born Upon the Wind, which kind of similarly fills in a role, but also quite different. Number 5 here, we have the Dihada Dash by Exodius. Now, our bannerman for Mardu Summer has not really been seeing a lot of play in cEDH since this summer, because I feel like a lot of the Dihada pilots moved on to Rogside, but here we have Dihada Binder of Wills making the 5th place placement in this top 16. For those who don't know, Dihada is basically a breach combo with the card Underworld Breach and with the sorcery Flicker. Flicker plus Dihada basically allows you to net a certain amount of mana as you mill through your entire library, and then you're able to win with a number of different combos like Dualcaster Mage plus Twin Flame, or some Mayhem Devil plus Dockside stuff. There's a number of different ways to win from that point. Praetor's Grasping your opponent's also kind of a similar vein there too. Blank Goblin, or underscore Goblin as I've known to call him, not Mind Goblin, is one of those cards that I definitely am not used to seeing in this archetype, but I find it very fascinating. I think this card is genuinely underrepresented, mostly because it's a pain in the butt to play it correctly and to have the sticker sheets you need. It's a pain. It's just a pain. But it's also a very powerful card that can often be like 3 mana for a minimum 4 mana, sometimes up to 6 mana. And that stuff can add up, turns out, especially when you're trying to play a very, very fast list like Dihada. Note for all the opponents of Dihada there, if your opponent's Dihada minuses, do not kill their Dihada. They actually like recasting their Dihada because it allows them to activate the minus ability again and then mill more and make more treasures. Fun fact, I think I saw a lot of people making that mistake early when they played against Dihada. A lot of the times what you want to do is you want to be able to hit Dihada down so it is not able to use its -3 ability, which is most of the reason you play the card, but so that it is able to stay on the battlefield. That's kind of how you neuter this commander from doing the thing. But yeah, this deck is very, very powerful. I mean, Dihada being able to minus, grab a Lurrus, and then use Lurrus to recast a Breach Out of the Yard is so powerful. We also have the Bolas's Citadel combo, which you can actually get by having a single other treasure and then playing Magda, which will then be able to use Magda's ability, put Citadel right in the battlefield. And this is a 23 land deck, so turns out pretty good Citadel deck. Yeah, Dihada is very, very strong. It's, ups and downs in the format, peaks and valleys. It's good sometimes, very bad other times. It's really hard to tell, but good pilots are able to win with this deck at blistering pace. It's quite fast. So that's pretty cool. Before we jump into our top 4, I want to talk to you for a second about cEDH coaching. It has become, over this past year, my full-time career. I coach cEDH for a living, and it's been a fantastic opportunity. And if you are interested in it, there are a number of different ways to contact me, all of which we can find in the description below. You can email me at comedianmtg@gmail.com. You can add me on Discord at comedian_MTG, or you can find me at Twitter at comedianmtg. If you are curious about those, feel free to message me on any of those places. It has been an amazing part of my year to be able to continue to focus on and hone my craft in this format. And I have so many clients that I really enjoy working with who I can see perform after we have those sessions. I've had some to go on to win tournaments, to make top 4s, make top 16s after our sessions. And it's been an awesome experience. I truly love what I do for a living. And yeah, if you want to find out a little bit more about cEDH coaching, there are 2 main types right now, which is one-on-one coaching where I sit down and do a Discord call with some people, or you can do a gameplay coaching, which is I sit myself and 3 other people who are sitting there ready to learn. We play about 2 hours of games, and then between games, we break down plays. We talk about plays during the moment, all that kind of stuff. So if you're interested in any of that, all of that place is in the description down below. Okay, so before we break down this specific next 2 decks in the top 4, there's a little background for this stuff, and I think this is so cool. So for those who don't know, the Colors Are a Crutch podcast is hosted by Max P and Wounded Satellite, also a Max. So the 2 Maxes have had this thing going back and forth where Wounded Satellite, who's known for playing Kinnan, loves Ob Nixilis. That's like his other deck that he spends a lot of time with, but he's never brought it to a tournament. And Max P has been kind of famous for playing Florian. Like that's been his claim to fame. He came in and took a deck that people never even really took seriously. And despite it not being on the database right now, it has still consistently put up results over and over again with Max as the pilot. So they kind of had this conversation of, especially after Wounded Satellite's Ob Nixilis deck got accepted to the database with him not actually putting up results with it, and Florian did not get accepted. They sort of had a little wager going, and Wounded was memeing saying that Ob is obviously better as a joke, right? So they have had this back and forth and this bit going for quite some time, and basically had a competition to see who would do better in this tournament, which was Wounded on Ob Nixilis and Max P on Florian. Well, it turns out not only did they both do well in this tournament, they are the 3rd and 4th place players in this tournament. Being literally right after each other in the top 4. So it's such a good story to end up this tournament on. And we'll take a second to break down each of their decks, but I love it. They challenge each other. They basically ended up in the exact same place with Max's Wounded Satellites win percentage being just that tiny bit higher, enough to get him into the 3rd place spot as opposed to the 4th place slot. But this is, I mean, what a great story. 2 friends challenging each other and going deep into a tournament because of it. So super shout out to both of those two. Let's talk about this Florian list. So Florian basically says when at the beginning of your post-combat main, you look at top X cards of your library, where X is the total amount of life your opponents lost this turn. Exile one of those cards and you can cast it this turn, or play it actually, because you can get lands too. So this deck is deep Rakdos turbo jam it kind of deck, right? We are playing like Bolas' Citadel with Aetherflux Reservoir, right? You're on Conqueror's Well, you're on Defense Grid, you're on Necropotent's Line, you're on Breach. This is a list that is 100% foot on gas pedal going fast, right? And it has this little bit of extra push to it because Florian, and playing a bunch of these creatures, is able to kind of dig down deeper into your library because you are chunking people for a good amount of damage. And unlike Tymna, where you kind of want to spread the damage out, with Florian, you're actually kind of incentivized to like gang up on one person, deal a bunch of damage to him, and that way you're digging like 10 cards deep into your library, right? Now, obviously, compared to a card like Tymna, you have less colors. You also lose to things like Drain of Magistrate, which is not exactly where you want to be, but it's definitely a deck that doesn't want to be around for a Drain of Magistrate, right? Like this deck is going fast. So you have Dockside, you have Mayhem Devil, but this deck is truly a very proactive deck. I mean, we are playing Peer into the Abyss, we are playing Ad Nauseam, and we are playing Bolas' Citadel, trying to win with things like, once again, Aetherflux Reservoir. There is, I guess, no longer dual caster lines in this deck, which is pretty crazy. A lot of it seems to be like deep Breach combos, and Aetherflux seems to be the main win con in this list. I guess there's also probably some lines with like Mayhem Devil plus Dockside and looping those with Breach. There's also the Stitcher Supplier plus Calling the Weak Underworld Breach line, where you sack it and basically you net 2 black mana and mill a couple cards each and every time you go through that iteration and that loop. But yeah, this deck is definitely trying to go fast. It is a very aggressive Rakdos list, playing some cool new stuff like Inti in this deck, which I think is pretty hot. Whenever you discard a card, you can exile top card of your library and play it into your next end step. So you're getting card advantage with your commander. You can also make your commander stronger by giving it +1 counters with Inti. You have Magda Treasure synergies, able to go grab that Citadel. You have Bergi, able to fully gas pedal you out. You have some of these like 0 drops that help you just get that early damage in with your commander, which is pretty sick. I mean, this deck is doing a lot, and it is doing Rakdos right. It is going fast. It is turboing stuff out. Yeah, it's trying to press the advantage well, and that's what we are seeing here with this list. So congrats, Max, on making this deep run on the tournament, and sorry Wounded beat you by a couple percentage points. At the same time, they both lost in the top 4, so like they basically died. We have Leam in the Dust, Ob's Palace by Wounded Satellite. This is one of Wounded's, I believe very similar to his primer list on the database right now. It is Ob Nixilis doing the Ob Nixilis thing, right? It is an Ad Naz deck. It is a proactive type of combo deck, but it's also a number of other things. It is a all will be one combo deck, right? Combos very well with Obnixilis. This one is definitely more like Turbo E based. There's no Agatha Soul Cauldron Walking Ballista combo in this deck, which I find kind of interesting. This one is on dual caster lines, but for those who don't know, Ob is trying to create a lot of instances where you're pinging people for exactly 1 damage, and then therefore gaining you a ridiculous amount of card advantage that Rakdos is not very much used to. Then from that point, you are trying to go burr, basically. You are trying to accelerate your game plan, whether it's Citadel, whether it's Necro, whether it's all but on as 1-card combo, whether it's Breach. You're just trying to go fast, hard, and win the game. Yeah, and congrats to Wounded for this top 4. So happy to see this deck. We have Marneus Calgar here, IITT. It's in the tokens by TTC, the Thunder Conductor. I love Marneus Calgar quite a lot. I think this is such a cool commander, and I'm happy that it's seeing play. I was genuinely not expecting to see a Marneus deck built the way that this one was, right? So when I expect to see a Marneus Calgar deck, I expect to basically see the deck make a bunch of tokens all the time. But to be honest, there's not that many token enablers in the deck. We have Smothering Tithe, which is obviously the big one. If you have Marneus plus Smothering Tithe, your deck is going off at a blistering pace. We have Grim Hireling, which is definitely a good enabler with Marneus because, if I'm not mistaken, the first strike and double strike will each create treasures, and therefore you draw 2 with your commander, which is pretty sick, apart from the fact that Grim Hireling is just giving you a bunch of mana in the first place. You have Thassa's Oracle Lines, but also we have the token from Orcish Bowmasters, which probably doesn't make a ton of tokens, but there's actually a funny world where you can shoot your own Bowmasters army with your Bowmasters and therefore create more tokens as you're going along. We have Fairy Artisans, which is a card I've been talking about a lot with Kinnan pilots, but it's pretty underplayed in general. So it's kind of sick to see Fairy Artisans here in this deck. It's a pretty unique and powerful card to be able to, like, your opponent's best things that they're playing every turn, you can make a temporary copy of, and obviously triggering Marneus when you're going through that process is quite good. But the rest of this deck is just like Esper good stuff. For those who don't know, Marneus is technically an infinite mana outlet because you have this ability to pay 6, create 2 warriors. And when you create those warriors, obviously it triggers Marneus' ability to draw a card. So basically infinite colorless mana becomes an outlet with this deck. So you can do Hullbreaker Horror lines. There's Teferi Kitten, which is an infinite mana line, so just a draw your whole deck line, still pretty good. But you also have Isochron Scepter in this deck, which is not traditionally played as much anymore. But turns out when you can make infinite mana pretty easily, being able to just make infinite mana, draw your entire deck with Marneus works out pretty well. So yeah, this deck is really cool. Definitely not the way I expected Marneus to be built. Also, Lorien revealed in this deck is like making me wonder if there's any sort of secret tech that I'm missing here, but it doesn't quite seem like it. Just seems like a pretty okay card draw spell. But yeah, this deck is definitely pretty unique. More Esper good stuff than I was expecting from a Marneus list, but at the same time, pretty solid deck here from our pilot. Oh, Lotho too. I'm so sorry I missed that one when I was going through the deck. I know if you've already commented, hit the backspace button. I'm sorry. And our number 1 pilot here, we have Schnacktopotamus 17, the player that knocked me out of the top 16 here with Krark Sakashima. Schnack has actually knocked me out of 2 top 16s throughout the days, and genuinely a Kinnan pilot. Name of the deck. Yeah, it's not the name of the deck. It's not called Kinnan. I am so tired. Feel free to leave an abbreviated version of this in. It's probably pretty funny. Schnack's a good Krark Sakashima pilot, and very, very good at playing this deck, executing the storm turns well, very good at doing everything by the book, just good at piloting this deck. It is classic Krark Sakashima stuff. We are trying to get Krark out, cast a bunch of spells, try and get out our Sakashima right afterwards, or another doubler like Harmonic Prodigy. No Veyran in this deck, pretty interestingly enough. But something like Tavern Scoundrel also helps as well. And you get these Krark combos going and you just start drawing a bunch of cards and making a bunch of mana and casting spells over and over and over again. This deck is super powerful, and what we lost to in the top 16 was the addition of Born Upon the Wind in this deck. Wow, did this card absolutely clown on us. Now, I will say Schnack did have some pretty insane flips because every single time they cast Born Upon the Wind, they were able to copy it and then bring it back to hand. And when you're able to do that at instant speed, going through that loop multiple times, basically guaranteeing that every turn you can attempt to win over the top of what your opponents are doing. sort of puts Kark Sakashima in this place where it feels pretty unbeatable. And that's what happened to us. Was what, we survived like 2 or 3 of the iterations of Born Upon the Wind being channeled over and over again. And we were just getting clowned on. Yeah, the deck did really, really well. And some of these additions like Peak and Born were just drawing you a bunch of cards and doing exactly what Kark Saka needs to do. Schnack obviously plays this deck really, really well. It's a pilot I have a lot of respect for. As far as executing their win cons, and definitely someone who knows how to play this deck quite well. So congrats, Schnack, to winning this tournament with this Kark Sakashima deck here. Before we talk about other stuff here, let's talk about something that sort of did come up a good amount on this tournament here. And that's something that I've been talking about on this channel quite a lot over the past few months, something called draw gate, as I've been joking about it. Basically the idea that people hit this 2-win threshold and then proceed to draw into the top 16. There was even like pictures of the screenshots from certain rounds where like the top 5 pods all just drew into the top 16. Basically invalidating the last round of Swiss entirely in some of these tournaments. And a lot of TOs have come out and said, basically, this is just a problem when you have this many players and only play 5 rounds in some of these online events. It is tougher to be able to do that without fundamentally changing some of the way these draws work and things like that. So it is definitely something that a lot of people were frustrated by, this idea that basically, a bunch of these players just drew into the top 16. And crazy enough, you'll actually see a lot of these players here also had like 2-1-2 records, right? So the 12-point people who had lost a single game, several of them who attempted to draw into the top 16 also didn't make it. So basically you had to have 12 points to get in, and a bunch of people who tried to draw in also didn't get there. So definitely worth noting that that is something that has been happening in these tournaments. A lot of players are just pushing to play games, but there's also an incentive. Like if you go 2-0 in your first couple rounds, it's basically free to draw the next 3 matches of Magic instead of actually playing. That way you can lock in your top slot. So it's definitely a bit of a flaw in the way these things are working, and hopefully there can be some sort of solution, whether it's, maybe adding another round to these tournaments, which is tough on a single day tournament in online in general, or, working around and making it so that draws don't count as much, or other stuff like that. Hopefully there can be some adjustments made to make it so that people can't just do that, right? Hopefully that does get fixed, but it's something that came up a good amount in the discussions after this tournament. I know for personally, I drew the first round naturally, right? Like we went to time, there was no winner. And then I won the next 2 rounds, right? So for me, I was 2-1, and going to that 2 wins and 3 draw place locked in my top 16 slot. So for my last 2 rounds of Magic, I didn't play because it was just free to not play them, right? So not exactly what people want to be hearing about their cEDH tournaments. And even in that, I was able to go second in my pod for the top 16 match, right? So it was really, really free for me to be able to do that, and I ended with really good breakers because of that as well. So definitely tough that's where the tournaments are at a little bit. Hopefully, as I said, there's some solutions coming down the pipeline. We'd love to hear a little bit more. If anyone has any of those solutions and they want to throw them down in the comments below, I think that the community is sort of itching for them. And I know the big solution is just play more rounds, right? Like at the end of the day, like a lot of TOs have come out of the works eminence specifically in being like, hey, just play more rounds of Magic and this won't be a problem, right? But obviously, if you're trying to do 1-day tournaments with the amount of players you're trying to do it with, that doesn't quite work for this specific thing. So interesting to see what happens as we go through these next couple steps. Thank you all for watching this video. I would love to hear what you all thought was the most interesting stuff to come out of this tournament. Love to hear about the Rakdos rivalry up in our top 4, some of these new decks here in the top 16, or some of the innovations being made. One of the most unique blue farm lists I've ever seen happened in this tournament. So a lot of stuff happened here in this tourney, and I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.
Lie awake at night? Are you afraid to turn out the lights? Is there something you're scared of? What's there out in the dark? Make sure to keep all your windows locked. Do you